The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as Sarah Chen stepped off the transport truck. Her boots hit the dusty ground with a soft thud, and she immediately felt the weight of 18 pairs of eyes studying her every move. The Navy's advanced combat training facility in Coronado stretched before her like a concrete maze of obstacles and challenges. "Look what we got here," muttered Jake Morrison, a thick-set recruit from Texas who had been the unofficial leader of their training group. His voice carried across the formation area where the other recruits stood waiting for their next instructor. "They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now." Sarah ignored the comment and shouldered her gear bag. At 5 feet 4 inches and 130 pounds, she knew exactly what they were thinking. In a group of recruits who averaged 6 feet tall and 200 pounds of muscle, she looked like someone's little sister who had wandered onto the wrong base. The training facility buzzed with activity as drill instructors barked orders at various groups. The air smelled of sweat, diesel fuel, and determination. Sarah had been here before, but not as a recruit. The familiar sounds of combat training echoed from different areas of the compound. "Chun, Sarah L.," called out Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez as he approached with a clipboard. His weathered face showed no emotion as he looked her up and down. "You're assigned to Training Group 7. Fall in with the rest of them." The other recruits shifted uncomfortably as Sarah moved into formation. She could hear whispered comments and barely contained laughter. Tommy Walsh, a former college football player from Ohio, shook his head openly. "This is a joke, right, Chief?" Tommy asked. "We're supposed to be training for special operations, not babysitting." Chief Rodriguez's expression darkened. "Did I ask for your opinion, Walsh?" "No, Chief. But come on. Look at her. She's going to get someone killed out there." Sarah remained at attention, her expression neutral. She had heard worse comments during her years of service, though these recruits had no idea about her background. Her personnel file had been carefully scrubbed for this assignment, showing only basic training completion and a few administrative roles. "The only person who's going to get someone killed is the one running his mouth instead of focusing on training," Rodriguez replied sharply. "Chun is here because she earned her place, just like the rest of you think you did." The group fell silent, but Sarah could feel the resentment radiating from her fellow trainees. Mike Stevens, a former Marine who was cross-training into Navy Special Operations, crossed his arms and studied her with obvious skepticism. "What's your background, Chun?" Mike asked during their first break. The group had gathered around a water station, and all conversation stopped when he posed the question. "Administrative support mostly," Sarah replied, taking a sip from her water bottle. "Some basic security duties." This triggered another wave of muttered complaints. David Park, despite sharing her Asian heritage, looked particularly frustrated. "Administrative support," he repeated. "They pulled us all from combat arms and special programs, and they give us a desk clerk." Sarah continued drinking her water without responding. Her calm demeanor only seemed to irritate them more. She understood their frustration, even if it was misdirected. These men had spent months or years earning their spots in this program. From their perspective, her presence diminished the value of their achievements. The first training exercise began an hour later. Chief Rodriguez led them to an obstacle course that looked like something designed by someone who hated comfort. Rope climbs, wall scaling, mud crawls, and tire runs stretched across several hundred yards of unforgiving terrain. "This is a timed event," Rodriguez announced. "You'll run this course as a team. Everyone finishes, or you all run it again. The clock starts when I say go, and it stops when the last person crosses that finish line." Jake Morrison immediately took charge, organizing the group into what he thought was the most efficient order. "We'll put the strongest guys at key positions to help pull everyone through," he said, then turned to Sarah. "You just try to keep up. Don't slow us down." The course proved brutal from the first obstacle. A 12-foot wall required teamwork to get everyone over. The larger recruits boosted each other up, then reached down to pull up the next person. When Sarah's turn came, they lifted her easily, but their attitude suggested they were doing charity work. "Light as a feather," commented Alex Rivera, another recruit who had been relatively quiet until now. "Hope you can carry your own weight when it matters." The rope climb challenged everyone's upper body strength. One by one, the recruits hauled themselves up 30 feet of thick rope their arms burning with effort. When Sarah reached the rope, several of the others stopped to watch, expecting to see her struggle or fail entirely. Instead, she scaled the rope smoothly and efficiently, using a technique that conserved energy while maintaining speed. She reached the top faster than half the group and descended with controlled precision. "Lucky climb," Jake muttered, though his tone suggested he was beginning to pay attention. The mud crawl section forced them to belly crawl under barbed wire through 50 yards of thick, wet dirt. It was designed to be miserable, and it succeeded completely. Sarah emerged as muddy as everyone else, but she had maintained her position in the group without slowing their pace. By the time they reached the final obstacle, a series of tire runs that tested footwork and endurance, several of the recruits were breathing heavily. The California sun had climbed higher, turning the training ground into an oven. Sweat mixed with dirt on every face. Sarah completed the tire run with the same steady efficiency she had shown throughout the course. Her breathing was controlled, her movements precise. When the group crossed the finish line, their time was respectable but not exceptional. "Not bad for a first run," Chief Rodriguez said, checking his stopwatch. "But you can do better. Take 15 minutes. Then we'll move to the next exercise." During the break, the atmosphere among the recruits had shifted slightly. The outright hostility had been replaced by cautious observation. Sarah hadn't slowed them down, but she also hadn't proven herself as anything special. "Where did you learn to climb rope like that?" asked Jason Torres, a former Army Ranger who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. "Basic training," Sarah replied simply. "Basic training doesn't teach you to climb like that," Mike Stevens interjected. "I've seen Marines struggle more than you just did." Sarah shrugged. "Maybe I had a good instructor." The next exercise moved them to a shooting range where they would be tested on marksmanship with various weapon systems. Chief Rodriguez handed out M4 carbines and explained the drill. Targets at multiple distances, different positions, and time constraints would challenge their accuracy under pressure. "This is where we separate the real operators from the wannabes," Jake said loudly enough for everyone to hear. He had been a competitive shooter in civilian life, and clearly expected this to be his moment to shine. The range session began with basic prone shooting at stationary targets. One by one, the recruits took their turns while the others observed and critiqued. Jake performed well, placing most of his shots in the center rings. Tommy Walsh struggled slightly with the precision shooting, but showed improvement as he adjusted. Mike Stevens shot with the steady competence of someone who had used weapons in combat. When Sarah's turn came, the conversation among the waiting recruits died down. They watched as she settled into the prone position and adjusted her sight picture. Her first shot surprised them, a clean hit in the center of the target at 300 yards. "Beginner's luck," someone whispered. Her second shot hit even closer to the center. The third, fourth, and fifth shots grouped tightly around the bullseye in a pattern that would have impressed experienced marksmen. When she moved to the kneeling position and repeated the performance, then, again from standing, the whispers stopped entirely. "Where did you say you learned to shoot?" Chief Rodriguez asked, studying her target through binoculars. "Basic training and some range time," Sarah replied, setting down her rifle. "Some range time," Mike Stevens repeated slowly. "Right." The final exercise of the day involved hand-to-hand combat scenarios. Chief Rodriguez paired them off for grappling drills designed to test their ability to control and subdue opponents. The recruits who had been dismissive of Sarah throughout the day suddenly looked uncomfortable when Rodriguez announced the pairings. "Chun, you're with Morrison," the chief called out. Jake Morrison was nearly a foot taller than Sarah and outweighed her by at least 70 pounds. He looked genuinely concerned about the matchup, though not for himself. "Chief, maybe we should," he began. "Maybe you should follow orders and stop questioning every decision," Rodriguez cut him off. The grappling area was covered with thick mats that would cushion falls and throws. Other pairs of recruits began their drills while Jake and Sarah faced each other in their assigned space. "Look, I don't want to hurt you," Jake said quietly. "Maybe we can just go through the motions?" Sarah assumed a ready position. "Just follow the drill, Morrison." Jake moved forward cautiously, reaching for what he expected to be an easy takedown. His size and strength advantage should have made this a simple matter of grabbing and controlling his smaller opponent. Instead, he found himself on his back staring up at the ceiling before he fully understood what had happened. Sarah had used his forward momentum against him, redirecting his weight and balance with a technique that was both subtle and devastatingly effective. "What the hell?" Jake said from the mat. "Reset, and go again," Chief Rodriguez called out, though his tone suggested he was paying much closer attention to their particular drill than the others. Jake got back to his feet, his confusion replaced by determination. This time he moved more carefully, trying to use his reach advantage to control the engagement. Sarah waited patiently, then slipped inside his guard and executed a throw that sent him tumbling across the mat again. By the third reset, Jake was breathing hard and looking frustrated. The other recruits had stopped their own drills to watch. Sarah remained calm and controlled, never appearing to exert much effort, even as she consistently dominated someone who should have overpowered her easily. "Time," Rodriguez called out before Jake could embarrass himself further. "Switch partners." Sarah's next opponent was Mike Stevens, who approached the drill with the calculated aggression of someone who understood combat. He lasted longer than Jake had, but the result was the same. Sarah's technique was too refined, too perfectly executed for any of them to counter effectively. One by one, she worked through partners who grew increasingly frustrated and bewildered. Tommy Walsh tried to use his football experience to bull rush her, only to find himself thrown across the mat. David Park attempted to match her technique with precision, but lacked her level of skill and experience. By the end of the session, every recruit in the group had faced Sarah in grappling drills. Every one of them had been dominated by someone they had dismissed as unqualified just hours earlier. As they gathered their gear at the end of the training day, the attitude among the 18 recruits had shifted dramatically. The open hostility had been replaced by confused respect mixed with suspicion. They knew they had witnessed something that didn't match Sarah's supposed background. "Administrative support, my ass," Tommy Walsh said quietly to Jake Morrison as they walked toward the barracks. "Something's not right here," Jake agreed. "Nobody learns to fight like that pushing papers around." Sarah walked behind them, close enough to hear their conversation, but giving no indication that she was listening. She had expected this reaction. Her cover story was thin enough that any competent operator would see through it quickly. The barracks assignment put her in a room adjacent to the others, giving her some privacy while keeping her close enough for the group dynamic to develop naturally. As she unpacked her gear, she could hear heated discussions through the thin walls. "She made us all look like amateurs," Alex Rivera was saying. "Did you see how she handled that rope climb? And the shooting? Nobody shoots that well without serious training." "Maybe she's some kind of test," suggested Jason Torres. "They plant ringers in training programs sometimes to see how we react. Or maybe she's exactly what she says she is, and we're just not as good as we thought," Mike Stevens said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe his own words. Sarah finished organizing her belongings and sat on her bunk, reviewing the day's events. The initial phase of her assignment was proceeding as expected. She had demonstrated enough capability to earn their attention without revealing the full extent of her abilities. Her real identity remained classified far above these recruits' clearance levels. The mission parameters were simple: evaluate their readiness for advanced training while maintaining her cover as a regular recruit. What she had observed during their first day raised several concerns about their potential for special operations work. Their initial reaction to her presence had shown a lack of professionalism that could be dangerous in actual combat situations. The dismissive attitude towards someone they perceived as different or inferior suggested thinking patterns that could get people killed in the field. However, their willingness to include her in the team exercises, even reluctantly, demonstrated some positive qualities. And their growing respect based on demonstrated performance rather than credentials showed they could adapt their thinking when presented with new information. The real test would come in the following days as the training intensity increased and the scenarios became more realistic. Sarah's cover would become harder to maintain as the exercises demanded higher levels of skill and knowledge. She opened her laptop and began typing a brief report on the day's observations. Her actual background included 12 years of active duty service, multiple deployments with special operations units, and expertise in areas that most of these recruits had never heard of. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. These men had spent months trying to prove they were elite enough for special operations training, while the person they had dismissed as unqualified was already a veteran special operator evaluating their suitability for her world. Outside her window, the sounds of the base settling into evening routine created a familiar backdrop. In a few hours, the lights would go out, and the recruits would try to get what sleep they could before tomorrow's training resumed. Sarah closed her laptop and prepared for another night of maintaining her deception. The hardest part of the assignment wasn't the physical challenges or the hostile reception from her fellow recruits. It was pretending to be something less than she was while watching them struggle with concepts she had mastered years ago. Tomorrow would bring new tests and new opportunities for her to gather intelligence on their capabilities and attitudes. The question that would determine the success of her mission was whether these 18 recruits could overcome their preconceptions and develop the mental flexibility that special operations demanded. The answer to that question would influence decisions about their futures and the future composition of elite units. Sarah's evaluation would carry significant weight in determining who moved forward and who was sent back to conventional forces. As she turned off her light and settled into her bunk, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Tomorrow would be even more interesting than today had been. Dawn arrived with the harsh sound of Chief Rodriguez's whistle echoing through the barracks. Sarah was already awake, as was her habit, but she waited for the official wake-up call before moving. Around her, the other recruits struggled out of their bunks with various degrees of complaint and groaning. "Rise and shine, ladies," Rodriguez bellowed from the doorway. "You've got 30 minutes to get fed and geared up. Today we find out what you're really made of." The mess hall buzzed with nervous energy as the recruits grabbed quick breakfasts and speculated about what the day would bring. Sarah noticed that several of them kept glancing in her direction, their expressions showing a mixture of curiosity and wariness that hadn't been there the day before. Jake Morrison approached her table with his breakfast tray. "Mind if I sit?" Sarah gestured to the empty chair across from her. Jake sat down and picked at his eggs for a moment before speaking. "Look, about yesterday," he said quietly. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot." "Maybe," Sarah agreed, continuing to eat her oatmeal. "It's just that this program means everything to us, you know? We've been working toward this for years. When someone shows up who doesn't fit what we expected," he trailed off, searching for the right words. "You thought I would make you look bad," Sarah finished. Jake nodded. "Yeah, something like that. But yesterday, I mean, where did you learn to fight like that?" Sarah looked up from her breakfast. "Same place you learned to make assumptions about people." The comment stung, but Jake took it without defensiveness. "Point taken. Maybe we should start over." Before Sarah could respond, Chief Rodriguez's voice boomed across the mess hall. "Training Group 7, finish up and meet me at equipment issue. 5 minutes." The equipment room was filled with gear that looked more serious than what they had used the previous day. Combat harnesses, night vision devices, communication equipment, and weapons that went far beyond basic rifles. The recruits exchanged glances as they realized the training was about to escalate significantly. "Today we begin real scenario training," Rodriguez announced. "You'll be working as a team to complete missions that simulate actual special operations tasks. The scenarios are based on real events, and the standards are the same ones used for active duty operators." He gestured toward a table covered with tactical gear. "You'll have access to all the equipment you need, but you'll need to decide as a team how to organize and utilize it. Leadership will rotate among you based on the mission requirements." Tommy Walsh raised his hand. "Who decides who leads each mission?" "You do," Rodriguez replied. "Part of this exercise is learning to recognize expertise and delegate authority appropriately. In the real world, the person with the most relevant experience leads, regardless of rank or ego." The first scenario took place in a mock urban environment built to resemble a Middle Eastern city. The mission briefing was straightforward: infiltrate a compound, gather intelligence, and extract without detection. Simple in concept, but complex in execution. "All right, people," Jake said, automatically assuming leadership as he had the previous day. "Let's plan this out." Mike Stevens spread out the aerial photos of the target area. "We need to identify entry and exit routes, establish security positions, and determine how to access the intelligence without triggering alarms." David Parks studied the building schematics. The target is a 3-story structure with guards at the front entrance and roving patrols. The intelligence is supposed to be in a safe on the 2nd floor. What kind of security systems are we dealing with? Asked Alex Rivera. Jake looked around the group. Anyone have experience with electronic security? Several recruits shook their heads. Sarah remained quiet, observing their planning process. She could see multiple flaws in their approach already, but her role was to evaluate, not to solve their problems for them. Maybe we should split into 2 teams, Tommy suggested. One creates a distraction while the other infiltrates. That's too risky, Mike countered. If the distraction team gets caught, the whole mission fails. The discussion continued for 20 minutes without reaching a clear plan. The recruits were smart and motivated, but they lacked the experience to see the subtle factors that would determine success or failure. Finally, Jason Torres spoke up. What do you think, Chin? You've been quiet. All eyes turned to Sarah. She could feel them waiting for her input, testing whether she would contribute meaningfully or confirm their suspicions that she was out of her depth. The guard rotation changes every 4 hours, she said calmly. The gap in coverage happens during the changeover. We have about 3 minutes to get inside and reach the target floor. Jake looked at the intelligence packet again. How do you know that? It's in the briefing materials, Sarah replied. Page 4, paragraph 3. Mike Stevens flipped through his papers. She's right. I missed that completely. 3 minutes isn't much time, David pointed out. Sarah continued. The building plans show an access point through the utility room that bypasses the main security checkpoints. But someone needs to disable the backup alarm system before we go in. You know how to do that? Tommy asked. Administrative support includes facility security, Sarah said with a slight shrug. I've worked with these systems before. The group exchanged glances. Her explanation was plausible, but convenient. However, they needed her knowledge if they were going to succeed. All right, Jake said. Let's try it your way. The infiltration exercise began after dark, using night vision equipment that most of the recruits had limited experience with. Sarah moved through the simulated environment with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this before, while the others struggled to adapt to the green-tinted world of enhanced vision. She led them to the utility access point she had identified, a route that avoided the main security positions while providing cover from observation. The recruits followed her lead, beginning to trust her tactical judgment despite their lingering questions about her background. The electronic security system proved more complex than the briefing had indicated. Sarah worked on the control panel while the others provided security, her fingers moving across the interface with practiced efficiency. How long is this going to take? Alex whispered. Almost done, Sarah replied quietly. A moment later, a soft beep indicated the system had been bypassed. The team moved through the building with improved coordination, following Sarah's lead on route selection and timing. They reached the target room without detection and located the intelligence materials exactly where the briefing had indicated. The extraction proved as smooth as the infiltration. Sarah guided them back through the building and out through their entry point. The entire mission was completed in under 40 minutes, well within the time limit. Chief Rodriguez was waiting for them at the debriefing area with a stopwatch and evaluation sheets. Not bad for a first attempt. Who planned the route and security bypass? The group looked at each other uncomfortably. Jake had started as the leader, but Sarah had provided the critical expertise that made success possible. Chen identified the key factors, Mike Stevens said honestly. We would have failed without her input. Rodriguez made notes on his evaluation form. Interesting. Chen, where did you learn building infiltration techniques? Cross-training with security personnel, Sarah replied. Administrative staff need to understand the systems we're supposed to protect. The explanation satisfied Rodriguez, though Sarah could see he was filing the information away for future reference. Her cover story was holding, but each demonstration of expertise made it more fragile. The second scenario of the day involved a hostage rescue simulation. The mission parameters were more complex. Armed hostiles holding civilian captives in a multi-room facility, with rules of engagement that prioritized hostage safety over speed. This time, Mike Stevens took leadership based on his prior military experience. However, he quickly found himself seeking Sarah's input on tactical options and timing. The hostiles are positioned here and here, he said, pointing to the facility diagram. If we breach simultaneously from multiple points, we can overwhelm them before they can hurt the hostages. Sarah studied the layout carefully. What about the back room? The one marked as storage. Mike looked at the plans again. What about it? The briefing says there are 6 hostiles total, but you've only identified 4 positions. If the other 2 are in that room, a simultaneous breach gives them time to execute hostages before we can reach them. Tommy Walsh looked confused. So what do you suggest? Sequential entry, Sarah said. Take out the rear positions first, quietly. Then, hit the main room fast and hard. That's a lot more complicated, David pointed out. But it's safer for the hostages, Jason Torres agreed. And isn't that the primary objective? Mike considered the options. All right, Chun, you and Torres take the rear entry. The rest of us will stage for the main breach and wait for your signal. The hostage rescue scenario unfolded exactly as Sarah had predicted. She and Jason eliminated the rear guards with simulation weapons while the rest of the team prepared their assault. When they breached the main room, the remaining hostiles were overwhelmed before they could react. All hostages were successfully recovered without casualties. The mission time was longer than a direct assault would have taken, but the success rate was significantly higher. During the debriefing, Rodriguez asked pointed questions about decision-making and tactical planning. Again, the recruits honestly credited Sarah with the key insights that led to mission success. 2 for 2, Rodriguez noted. Chen seems to have a knack for seeing the important details. The final exercise of the day was individual rather than team-based. Each recruit would complete a timed obstacle course that combined physical challenges with problem-solving elements. It was designed to reveal individual capabilities under pressure. The course included rope bridges, wall climbs, weapon assembly tasks, and navigation challenges that required both mental and physical skills. Most of the recruits approached it as a physical test, trying to muscle their way through obstacles with brute force and determination. Sarah took a different approach. She studied each obstacle briefly before attempting it, looking for the most efficient solution rather than the most obvious one. Her movements were economical and precise, conserving energy while maintaining speed. At the weapon assembly station, she stripped and reassembled an M4 rifle faster than anyone else in the group. The navigation section, which required map reading and compass work in low visibility conditions, posed no challenge for someone with her experience. When the times were posted, Sarah had completed the course faster than all 18 of her fellow recruits. Her margin of victory wasn't small. She had beaten the second-place finisher by over 3 minutes. Outstanding time, Chun, Chief Rodriguez said, studying the results. Where did you develop those navigation skills? Orienteering clubs, Sarah replied. I've always enjoyed outdoor activities. The explanation was becoming thinner with each exceptional performance, but it was still technically plausible. However, the accumulation of coincidences was starting to strain credibility. That evening, the atmosphere in the barracks was noticeably different. The hostility towards Sarah had been replaced by a mixture of respect and growing suspicion. The recruits knew they were in the presence of someone with capabilities that far exceeded her stated background. There's no way she's just administrative support, Tommy said during an informal gathering in the common area. Nobody develops those skills pushing paperwork around. Maybe she's former military, suggested Alex. Could have transferred from another service and ended up in admin roles. Mike Stevens shook his head. I've seen former military in admin jobs. They don't move like she does. They don't think like she does. Jake Morrison had been quiet during most of the discussion. Finally, he spoke up. Does it matter what her real background is? She's helping us succeed. It matters if she's not who she claims to be, David replied. What if this is some kind of test? What if they're evaluating how we react to deception? The conversation was interrupted by Sarah entering the common area. The discussion stopped immediately, creating an awkward silence that she couldn't ignore. Don't stop talking on my account, she said, moving toward the vending machines. We were just discussing today's training, Jake said diplomatically. Sarah selected a bottle of water and turned to face the group. You were discussing whether I'm lying about my background. The directness of her statement caught them off guard. Several recruits looked uncomfortable, while others appeared relieved that the topic was finally in the open. Can you blame us? Mike asked. Your performance doesn't match your story. Sarah opened her water bottle and took a sip before responding. What performance? I completed the same training you did. You completed it better than people who have been training for this their whole careers, Tommy pointed out. Maybe you haven't been training as hard as you thought, Sarah replied. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. It was both insulting and uncomfortably accurate. These recruits had assumed their backgrounds automatically qualified them for elite status, but Sarah's presence was forcing them to question that assumption. Look, Jason Torres said, trying to defuse the tension. We're all on the same side here. Whatever your background is, you're helping the team succeed. Are we on the same side? Alex Rivera asked pointedly. Because if she's here under false pretenses, then she's lying to people who are supposed to be her teammates. Sarah set down her water bottle and faced the group directly. You're right. I haven't been completely honest about my background. The admission created a moment of stunned silence. Several recruits leaned forward, waiting for the revelation they had been suspecting. I have more training than I initially indicated, Sarah continued. But everyone here has been less than completely honest about something. Morrison, you didn't mention that you washed out of Ranger School before coming here. Stevens, your Marine service ended with a medical discharge that you're hoping this program will help you overcome. She looked around the group, meeting each person's eyes. We all have reasons for being here that go beyond what's in our official records. The question is whether we're going to work together or spend our time investigating each other. The accuracy of her statements about their backgrounds shocked the recruits. Information that they thought was private or confidential had somehow become known to her. How do you know those things? Jake asked quietly. The same way I knew about the guard rotations and the building schematics, Sarah replied. I pay attention to details that matter. Mike Stevens stood up slowly. Who are you really? Sarah looked at him for a long moment before answering. I'm someone who's trying to help you succeed. Whether you let me do that is up to you. She picked up her water bottle and headed toward the door. Tomorrow's training is going to be harder than today. You might want to spend your time preparing instead of playing detective. After she left, the common area remained silent for several minutes. The recruits processed what they had just learned and the questions it raised about their mysterious teammate. She's right about one thing, Jake finally said. Tomorrow is going to be harder. And, so far, we've needed her help to succeed. But can we trust her? David asked. Do we have a choice? Mike replied. She's part of the team whether we like it or not. The discussion continued late into the evening, but the focus had shifted. Instead of trying to expose Sarah's deception, the recruits began considering how to work with someone who clearly had capabilities and knowledge that exceeded their own. In her room, Sarah typed another report on the day's activities. The recruits were beginning to adapt to her presence and acknowledge her contributions, which was a positive development. However, their investigation into her background showed initiative and critical thinking that could serve them well in actual operations. The balance of her assignment was becoming more delicate. She needed to maintain enough of her cover to continue the evaluation while demonstrating the skills necessary to guide their training. Each day would require careful calibration of how much to reveal and how much to conceal. Outside her window, the base had settled into the quiet routine of another night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities for both Sarah and the recruits she was evaluating. The question was whether they would rise to meet those challenges together or allow suspicion and mistrust to undermine their potential. The third day of training began before sunrise with an unexpected development. Chief Rodriguez gathered Training Group 7 in the briefing room while the base was still dark, their faces lit only by the harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in stark shadows. Change of plans, Rodriguez announced without preamble. We just received word that you'll be participating in a joint exercise with active duty special operations personnel. This is not a drill or simulation. You'll be working alongside real operators on a live training scenario. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. This was far beyond what they had expected during their evaluation period. Working with active special operations teams was usually reserved for candidates who had already proven themselves through months of advanced training. The exercise involves a complex infiltration and data recovery mission, Rodriguez continued. You'll be integrated into existing teams and evaluated on your ability to perform under real operational conditions. Transport leaves in 30 minutes. Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Working with active duty operators created a significant risk of exposure. There was always the possibility that someone might recognize her, especially if the exercise involved teams from her former units. The transport ride to the exercise location took 2 hours through increasingly remote terrain. The recruits sat in nervous silence, each processing the reality that they were about to be tested against professional standards they might not be ready to meet. When they arrived at the training facility, Sarah immediately recognized several vehicles and equipment configurations that indicated the presence of multiple special operations units. This was a major exercise involving significant resources and personnel. Training Group 7, over here, called a voice from near the command tent. The speaker was a tall, athletic woman in her early 30s wearing the uniform of a Navy SEAL lieutenant. Her name tag read Martinez. As they approached, Sarah kept her face neutral despite recognizing Lieutenant Martinez immediately. They had served together on 2 deployments, and Martinez knew exactly who Sarah was and what her real background included. "I'm Lieutenant Martinez, and I'll be your liaison for this exercise," the officer said, her eyes scanning the group of recruits. When her gaze reached Sarah, there was the slightest pause, almost imperceptible to anyone not watching for it. "You'll be divided among 3 teams for different mission components," Martinez continued. "Each team will work with experienced operators who will evaluate your performance and provide feedback." The team assignments were read quickly. Sarah found herself assigned to Team Bravo, along with Jake Morrison, Mike Stevens, Tommy Walsh, David Park, and Jason Torres. The 6 of them were directed to a staging area where their assigned operators waited. Team Bravo's leader was Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, a veteran SEAL with over 15 years of experience. His weathered face and calm demeanor spoke of someone who had seen combat in multiple theaters and survived by being both competent and careful. "Gentlemen," Williams said, then paused when he noticed Sarah. "And lady, welcome to the real world. For the next 8 hours, you're part of my team. That means you follow orders, stay alert, and try not to get anyone killed." The mission briefing revealed a complex scenario involving the infiltration of a terrorist compound to recover critical intelligence about planned attacks. The target was a multi-building complex defended by role-players armed with simulation weapons that could inflict realistic casualties. "The intelligence indicates that the target materials are located in the central building," Williams explained, pointing to aerial photographs. "However, the compound is heavily defended with overlapping fields of fire and electronic security systems." Sarah studied the photographs and immediately began identifying potential approach routes and security vulnerabilities. Her analysis was automatic, drawing on years of experience with similar operations. "What's your assessment, Chun?" Williams asked, noticing her focused examination of the materials. Sarah looked up, aware that her answer would be evaluated not just by Williams, but by the other recruits who were still uncertain about her capabilities. "The direct approaches are too heavily defended," she said carefully. "But the eastern perimeter shows gaps in the sensor coverage that might allow infiltration through the maintenance area." Williams nodded approvingly. "Good eye. What else do you see?" "The guard rotations appear to follow a predictable pattern, but there's a roving patrol that could complicate timing. And the central building has multiple exit routes, which suggests the defenders expect to be attacked and have planned fallback positions." "Outstanding analysis," Williams said. "Morrison, your team leader for the recruits. Chun, you'll serve as intelligence advisor. Stevens and Walsh, your assault elements. Park and Torres, you'll provide security and communications." The assignment of roles surprised the recruits, particularly the decision to make Sarah the intelligence advisor, a position that typically required extensive training and clearance levels far above what an administrative support person would possess. During the preparation phase, Sarah found herself working closely with the active duty operators to refine the mission plan. Her suggestions were technical and sophisticated, drawing on knowledge that went far beyond basic training. "You've done this before," observed Petty Officer First Class Johnson, one of Williams' team members. It wasn't a question. Sarah looked at him carefully. "Done what?" Mission planning at this level. Route analysis, threat assessment, timing coordination. This isn't stuff they teach in basic. I've had good training, Sarah replied neutrally. Johnson studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Must have been very good training. The infiltration began at sunset, with the team moving through terrain that challenged both physical fitness and tactical awareness. Sarah moved with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in hostile environments, while the other recruits struggled to maintain the same level of noise discipline. Chun, take point for the final approach, Williams whispered as they neared the target compound. Leading the team forward, Sarah navigated through the security perimeter with movements that were both precise and intuitive. She seemed to know exactly where the sensors would be positioned and how to avoid triggering them. The other recruits followed her lead, beginning to understand that they were witnessing expertise that went far beyond anything they had been told to expect. Sarah's movements weren't just skilled, they were professional in a way that spoke of extensive field experience. The central building proved as complex as the briefing had indicated. Sarah led them through a route that bypassed the primary security measures while avoiding the patrol patterns she had identified during planning. "How did you know about that sensor?" Jake whispered after Sarah had guided them around a motion detector that wasn't marked on their intelligence maps. "Standard placement for perimeter security," Sarah replied quietly. "They always put them where the terrain forces you to take the obvious route." The intelligence recovery went smoothly under Sarah's guidance. She identified the correct location for the target materials and coordinated the team's movements to maintain security while completing their objective. During the extraction phase, complications arose when one of the roving patrols changed their route unexpectedly. The team found themselves trapped between two guard positions with limited options for escape. "We're stuck," Tommy whispered urgently. "If we move, they'll spot us." Sarah evaluated the situation quickly, considering factors that the other recruits couldn't see. Her experience with similar scenarios provided options that weren't obvious to less experienced operators. "There's a drainage culvert about 50 meters to our left," she said quietly. "It runs under the perimeter fence and comes out near the vehicle staging area." Williams looked at her sharply. "How do you know about the culvert?" "It wasn't in the intelligence briefing. I noticed it during the approach," Sarah replied. The terrain elevation change suggested underground drainage. It was a plausible explanation, but Williams' expression indicated he was filing the information away for future consideration. Sarah's tactical awareness was consistently exceeding what her background should have provided. The escape through the drainage system proved successful, though challenging. The recruits struggled through the confined space, while Sarah moved efficiently, demonstrating comfort with unconventional routes that suggested extensive training in escape and evasion. When they reached the extraction point, the exercise concluded with a comprehensive debriefing that included both the recruit performance and the overall mission effectiveness. Team Bravo performed exceptionally well, Williams reported to the assembled group. Leadership was effective, intelligence analysis was thorough, and execution was nearly flawless. Chief Rodriguez took notes as Williams continued his assessment. However, there were some interesting dynamics that merit discussion. Williams looked directly at Sarah. "Chin's performance was outstanding, but it raises questions about the accuracy of her personnel file." The statement created tension among the recruits and observers. Sarah remained calm, but she knew that her cover was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. "Can you elaborate on that, Master Chief?" Rodriguez asked. Chin demonstrated tactical knowledge and field skills that suggest extensive special operations training, Williams said carefully. Her movement patterns, threat assessment capabilities, and technical expertise are consistent with someone who has significant experience in this environment. Lieutenant Martinez stepped forward. "What are you suggesting, Master Chief?" Williams looked around the group before answering. "I'm suggesting that Chun has been less than completely honest about her background, and that her real experience level may be significantly higher than indicated in her file." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. The recruits looked between Sarah and the officers, waiting to see how she would respond to the direct challenge. "My performance today was based on the training I've received and the preparation we did as a team," Sarah said calmly. "If that exceeded expectations, perhaps the expectations were set too low." It was a deflection rather than a denial, and everyone present recognized it as such. Williams nodded slowly, acknowledging her refusal to admit deception while noting her failure to deny it. Regardless of background questions, Rodriguez interjected. The mission was successful, and all team members contributed effectively. We'll address personnel file discrepancies through appropriate channels. The statement was diplomatic, but clear. Sarah's performance had attracted official attention that would be difficult to deflect. Her assignment was entering a new phase where maintaining cover might become impossible. During the return transport, the atmosphere among the recruits was subdued. They had performed well in the exercise, but the questions about Sarah's identity had cast a shadow over their success. "You're not going to tell us who you really are you?" Mike Stevens asked quietly. Sarah looked out the window at the passing landscape. "Would it change anything if I did?" "It might help us understand why you're here," Jake replied. "I'm here for the same reason you are," Sarah said. "To see if I can meet the standards required for special operations work." Tommy Walsh leaned forward. "But you've already met those standards, haven't you? You've been meeting them for years." Sarah turned to face the group. "What makes you think that?" "Everything," David Park said simply. "The way you move, the way you think, the way you see things the rest of us miss. You're not learning this stuff. You already know it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival back at the base. As they unloaded their gear, Sarah noticed Lieutenant Martinez approaching. "Chun, I need to speak with you privately," Martinez said. They walked away from the group to a quiet area near the equipment storage buildings. When they were out of earshot, Martinez's professional demeanor shifted slightly. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing here?" she asked quietly. "Following orders, same as always," Sarah replied. "Does Williams know who you are?" "Not yet, but he's suspicious." Today probably confirmed his suspicions. Martinez looked concerned. "This is getting complicated. How much longer can you maintain cover?" "As long as necessary to complete the evaluation," Sarah said. "But it's getting harder to stay below the radar." "Maybe it's time to consider alternative approaches," Martinez suggested. "The recruits are asking questions, and Williams is too experienced to be fooled much longer." Sarah nodded. "I know, but the mission parameters are clear. I need to complete the evaluation process before revealing anything." "Just be careful," Martinez said. "This kind of deception can backfire if it goes on too long." After Martinez left, Sarah rejoined the group as they prepared for evening chow. The recruits watched her approach with expressions that mixed respect, curiosity, and growing suspicion. The evening meal was quieter than usual, with conversations muted by the day's revelations. Sarah could feel the weight of their questions and knew that the next phase of her assignment would require different tactics. That night, she typed a detailed report on the day's exercise and the recruits' performance. Their integration with active duty operators had been successful, and their tactical skills were developing faster than expected. However, the scrutiny from experienced personnel was threatening her cover in ways that could compromise the entire evaluation process. Decisions would need to be made about how to proceed without destroying the mission objectives. Outside her window, the base settled into another quiet night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new questions that would be harder to deflect. Sarah's ability to maintain her deception was being tested by people who had the experience and expertise to see through carefully constructed lies. The recruits were also evolving, becoming more observant and analytical as their training progressed. Their growing awareness of her true capabilities created both opportunities and risks for the remainder of her assignment. The balance between maintaining cover and completing the mission was becoming increasingly precarious. Soon, Sarah would need to decide whether to reveal her true identity or find new ways to deflect the mounting suspicions that threatened to expose everything. The morning of the fourth day brought an ominous change to the training environment. Instead of the usual early wake-up call, Training Group 7 was summoned to a secure briefing room they had never seen before. Armed guards stood at the entrance, and electronic devices were confiscated before anyone was allowed inside. Chief Rodriguez waited inside with two people the recruits didn't recognize, a stern-looking woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Ms. Harrison from Naval Intelligence, and a tall man in Navy uniform whose insignia identified him as a full captain. "Sit down," Captain Morrison said without preamble. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "What I'm about to tell you is classified, and discussing it with anyone outside this room will result in immediate dismissal and possible criminal charges. The recruits exchanged nervous glances as they took their seats. Sarah maintained her composed expression, but internally, she was calculating the possible reasons for this development. Yesterday's exercise revealed some irregularities that require investigation, Ms. Harrison said, opening a thick folder. Specifically, the performance of one team member has raised questions about identity, background, and mission parameters. All eyes turned toward Sarah, who sat calmly despite knowing she was the focus of the investigation. The careful balance she had maintained was about to collapse. Chun, Sarah L. Captain Morrison read from his notes. According to your personnel file, you completed basic training 18 months ago and have been assigned to administrative duties since then. However, multiple observers have noted tactical knowledge and field skills inconsistent with that background. Sarah remained silent, waiting to see how much they had discovered and what they suspected versus what they could prove. Ms. Harrison leaned forward. Master Chief Williams submitted a formal report stating that your performance exceeded that of operators with years of Special Forces training. Lieutenant Martinez corroborated his observations. Both requested immediate investigation of your credentials. The mention of Lieutenant Martinez caused a slight tightening around Sarah's eyes that only the most observant would notice. She had hoped Martinez would maintain operational security longer. Furthermore, Captain Morrison continued, we've discovered discrepancies in your personnel file that suggest information has been deliberately obscured or falsified. Jake Morrison raised his hand tentatively. Sir, I don't understand what this has to do with the rest of us. It has everything to do with you, Ms. Harrison replied sharply. If Chun is operating under false credentials, it calls into question the integrity of this entire training program and your evaluations. Tommy Walsh looked confused. Are you saying she's not really Navy? We're saying we don't know who she really is, Captain Morrison answered. And, until we do, this training program is suspended pending a complete security review. The announcement hit the recruits like a physical blow. Months of preparation and weeks of training were suddenly in jeopardy because of questions about their teammates' identity. That's not fair, Mike Stevens protested. We didn't know anything about her background. How can you punish us for something we had no control over? Because special operations requires absolute trust, Ms. Harrison explained. If you can't identify deception in your own ranks, how can you be trusted in the field where lives depend on accurate intelligence? David Park turned to look at Sarah. Is it true? Have you been lying to us this whole time? Sarah met his gaze steadily. I've been exactly what you needed me to be. The cryptic answer frustrated everyone in the room. Captain Morrison slammed his hand on the table. Enough games, Chun. Who are you really, and what are you doing in my training program? Sarah looked around the room at the faces of the recruits who had slowly begun to accept her as part of their team. Their expressions showed confusion, betrayal, and anger at being deceived by someone they had started to trust. My name is Sarah Chun, she said quietly. Everything else is classified above your clearance level. Ms. Harrison opened another file. We've been able to piece together some information through database searches and cross-references. Sarah Chun, Navy SEAL, Petty Officer First Class, multiple deployments with Special Operations Command. The revelation stunned the recruits into silence. A Navy SEAL had been training alongside them, pretending to be an inexperienced administrative clerk while evaluating their every move. You're a SEAL? Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. Were you sent here to spy on us? Alex Rivera demanded, his voice rising with anger. Sarah remained calm in the face of their accusations. I was sent here to evaluate your readiness for special operations training. By lying to us. Tommy's face was flushed with indignation. By making us think you were just another recruit? By observing how you would react to someone you perceived as different or inferior, Sarah replied. By seeing whether you could recognize capability regardless of preconceptions. Captain Morrison nodded grimly. Operation Evaluation Alpha. We should have been briefed on this. Ms. Harrison checked her files. The operation was classified at a level that excluded local training command. Only select personnel were aware of the true mission parameters. So this whole time has been a test? David asked. Not just our training, but how we treated someone we thought was beneath us. Among other things, Sarah confirmed. The recruits processed this revelation with a mixture of emotions ranging from embarrassment to anger to grudging respect. They began to understand that their initial dismissive attitude towards Sarah had been part of what was being evaluated. "You made us look like idiots," Jason Torres said bitterly. "You made yourselves look like idiots," Sarah replied without sympathy. "I just gave you the opportunity." Mike Stevens leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. A real seal. And we treated her like dead weight." "Actually," Captain Morrison interjected, checking his notes, "according to the preliminary reports, you adapted relatively quickly once you observed her capabilities. That adaptability is a positive indicator for special operations aptitude." Ms. Harrison consulted her timeline. "The question now is whether to continue the evaluation under modified parameters or terminate the program due to security concerns." "What security concerns?" Jake asked. "The presence of an unidentified operator in a training environment creates multiple vulnerabilities," she explained. "If Chin's identity could be concealed from us this long, what other security gaps exist in our screening process?" Chief Rodriguez, who had been silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. "Ma'am, with respect, the security worked exactly as intended. Chin maintained her cover until her performance made it impossible to ignore. That suggests our evaluation protocols are functioning properly." Captain Morrison considered this point. "What's your assessment of the recruit's performance during this phase, Petty Officer Chin?" Sarah straightened slightly, shifting into a more formal military bearing. "The recruits showed initial prejudice based on perceived physical and experience limitations. However, they demonstrated adaptability when presented with evidence that contradicted their assumptions." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "Their tactical development has been faster than average, partly because they were forced to rely on teamwork rather than individual ego. The stress of working with an unknown variable actually improved their collective performance." "And their potential for special operations work?" Ms. Harrison asked. "Above average," Sarah said without hesitation. "They have the intelligence, physical capability, and mental flexibility required. Their main weakness is a tendency to make assumptions based on limited information." Tommy Walsh raised his hand. "Does this mean we pass or fail?" "It means you continue training," Captain Morrison announced. "But under modified conditions. Chin will remain with the group, but her true background will be known to all participants." The recruits looked at each other uncertainly. The dynamics of their group had been fundamentally altered by the revelation of Sarah's identity. "I have a question," Mike Stevens said. "If you're already a SEAL, why are you going through recruit training?" Sarah glanced at Captain Morrison, who nodded permission to answer. "Because special operations is evolving. We need to understand how to better integrate different types of operators and improve our training methods." "So we're guinea pigs," Alex Rivera said flatly. "You're pioneers," Sarah corrected. "The lessons learned from this program will influence how special operations training is conducted for the next generation." Ms. Harrison closed her files. "The security review is complete. Operation Evaluation Alpha will continue under the modified parameters outlined by Captain Morrison." As the briefing concluded and the recruits filed out, the atmosphere was noticeably different. The casual camaraderie that had begun to develop was replaced by uncertainty and awkwardness. In the corridor outside the briefing room, the group clustered together to process what they had learned. "I feel like an idiot," Jake said quietly. "All those comments about her not belonging here." "We all made those comments," David pointed out. "At least now we know why she was so good at everything." Tommy looked conflicted. "I don't know how I feel about this. On one hand, she was helping us succeed. On the other hand, she was lying to our faces every day. Was it lying, or was it just not telling us something we didn't need to know?" Jason asked. Mike Stevens watched Sarah walking ahead of them, alone. "The question is, what happens now? How do we work with someone who's been evaluating us like lab rats?" Sarah had heard their discussion but didn't turn around or acknowledge it. She understood their confusion and resentment. The revelation of her true identity had fundamentally changed her relationship with the group. That evening, the usual informal gathering in the common area was replaced by small, hushed conversations. The recruits were trying to reconcile their perception of Sarah as a struggling teammate with the reality of her as an experienced special operator. Around 10 o'clock, Jake Morrison approached Sarah's room and knocked on the door. "Come in," she called. Jake entered to find Sarah cleaning her gear with the methodical precision of someone for whom such maintenance was routine rather than assigned duty. "I wanted to apologize," he said without preamble, "for the way we treated you at the beginning." Sarah looked up from the rifle she was cleaning. "You treated me exactly the way you were supposed to. That doesn't make it right." Sarah set down her cleaning rod. "Morrison, you evaluated me based on the information you had available. When you got new information, you adjusted your assessment. That's exactly what operators need to do in the field." Jake sat down in the chair across from her. "But we were wrong. You were working with incomplete intelligence," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference between being wrong and being deceived. Is there? Because it feels like we failed some kind of test." Sarah considered the question carefully. "You passed the most important test. When it mattered, when missions were on the line, you listened to good advice regardless of where it came from. After initially dismissing you completely," Jake pointed out. "Initial reactions aren't what matter in special operations," Sarah said. "What matters is how quickly you can adapt when the situation changes. Your group adapted faster than most." Jake was quiet for a moment. "What happens now? How do we move forward from here?" "The same way you would move forward from any other intelligence update," Sarah replied. "You adjust your understanding and continue the mission. But the mission has changed, hasn't it? Now we know you're not really one of us." Sarah looked at him directly. "I was never one of you, Morrison. I was always something different. The only thing that's changed is that now you know what that difference is." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Mike Stevens entered, followed by the rest of the recruit group. "We need to talk," Mike announced. "All of us. Together." Sarah gestured for them to find seats wherever they could. The small room became crowded, but everyone managed to fit. "We've been talking," Tommy began, "and we realize we don't know how to handle this situation." "Handle what situation?" Sarah asked. "Working with someone who's been watching us and judging us this whole time," David explained. "It's like finding out your teammate has been a teacher all along, grading your every move." Sarah nodded. "That's a fair analogy, and not entirely inaccurate. So how do we move past it?" Alex asked. "How do we trust someone whose job it was to evaluate us?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "You don't trust me because of who I am. You trust me because of what I do, just like you would trust any other operator in the field." "But you're not just any other operator," Jason pointed out. "You're someone with authority over our futures." "Actually, I'm not," Sarah corrected. "My evaluation is one input among many. Your performance in the remaining training will carry more weight than anything I write in my reports." Mike leaned forward. "What have you been writing in those reports?" "That you have the potential to be excellent special operators if you can overcome your tendency to make assumptions based on limited information," Sarah said bluntly. The recruits exchanged glances. "Is that what you think our biggest weakness is?" Jake asked. "It's what I know your biggest weakness is. I've watched you struggle with it repeatedly." Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Give us an example." "You assumed I was unqualified based on my appearance and supposed background. You assumed the training scenarios had obvious solutions without looking for subtleties. You assumed that strength and aggression were more important than technique and intelligence." Sarah paused, making sure they were following her logic. "In every case, you eventually figured out your assumptions were wrong. But not before wasting time and energy on approaches that couldn't work." The criticism stung because it was accurate. The recruits recognized the pattern she was describing. "So what do we do about it?" David asked. "Start questioning your assumptions before acting on them," Sarah replied. "In training and in the field, the most dangerous enemy is the one you don't see because you're looking for what you expect instead of what's actually there." The conversation continued for another hour, with the recruits asking questions about Sarah's background, her mission, and the evaluation process. By the end, some of the tension had been resolved, though the relationship had irrevocably changed. As the group prepared to leave, Mike Stevens lingered behind. "One more question," he said. "If this had been a real deployment, would you have revealed who you were?" Sarah considered the hypothetical carefully. "If the mission required it, yes. But I would have preferred to accomplish the objectives without compromising my cover. Even if it meant letting us fail, your failure would have been part of the mission data," Sarah said. "My job is to evaluate, not to ensure success." Mike nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." That's what makes this so complicated. After he left, Sarah returned to cleaning her gear. The revelation of her identity had changed everything about her relationship with the recruits, but it hadn't changed her mission objectives. Tomorrow would begin a new phase of the evaluation, one where her role as observer was known to all participants. The question was whether the group could function effectively under these altered conditions, or whether the knowledge of being evaluated would undermine their natural development. Outside her window, the base settled into another night of preparation for the challenges ahead. The recruits would spend the evening processing what they had learned and trying to understand how to move forward. Sarah would spend it analyzing the day's developments and adjusting her evaluation criteria for the final phase of the program. The most challenging part of her assignment still lay ahead. The final phase of training began with a scenario that none of the recruits had anticipated. Instead of the controlled exercises they had grown accustomed to, they were informed that they would be participating in a real-world operation with actual strategic importance. "This is not a drill," Captain Morrison announced during the pre-dawn briefing. "Intelligence has identified a terrorist cell operating in a location that provides an opportunity for live training with minimal risk to ongoing operations." The recruits sat in stunned silence. Real operations were typically reserved for fully qualified special operators, not candidates still in evaluation. "The target is a small group believed to be planning an attack on civilian infrastructure," Ms. Harrison explained, displaying satellite imagery on the briefing room screen. "Local authorities have requested assistance, and this operation provides an ideal training opportunity." Sarah studied the intelligence materials with professional interest. The target profile and operational parameters suggested a carefully selected scenario that would challenge the recruits without exceeding their capabilities. "Shin will serve as mission advisor," Captain Morrison continued. "The recruits will plan and execute the operation under the supervision of active duty operators." Jake Morrison raised his hand. "Sir, are you saying we're going to conduct an actual arrest operation?" "You're going to support an operation conducted by qualified personnel," Ms. Harrison clarified. "Your role will be to demonstrate the skills and decision-making abilities you've developed during training." The mission briefing revealed a complex situation. The terrorist cell consisted of 4 individuals operating from a remote compound. Intelligence indicated they possessed weapons and explosives, but were not considered highly skilled or well-organized. "The primary objective is to capture the cell members alive and secure any materials related to their planned attack," Captain Morrison explained. "Secondary objectives include minimizing property damage and avoiding civilian casualties." Sarah recognized the scenario as a near-perfect test of the recruits' development. It required tactical planning, teamwork, leadership under pressure, and the ability to adapt to changing conditions, all while operating with real consequences for failure. "Questions?" Captain Morrison asked. Tommy Walsh raised his hand tentatively. "What if something goes wrong? What if we mess up? Then, people could die," Ms. Harrison replied bluntly. "That's why we're here. To determine whether you're ready for that level of responsibility." The weight of actual consequences settled over the group like a heavy blanket. These weren't training scenarios where failure meant running laps or repeating exercises. This was the real world where mistakes could have permanent results. "Mission planning begins immediately," Captain Morrison announced. "You have 4 hours to develop a comprehensive operational plan. Execution begins at sunset." As the recruits filed out of the briefing room, Sarah could see the mixture of excitement and terror on their faces. This was what they had been training toward, but none of them felt fully prepared for the reality. "All right, people," Jake said once they had gathered in the planning room. "This is what we've been working toward. Let's not screw it up." The planning session began with Mike Stevens taking charge of intelligence analysis, while David Park focused on logistics and equipment requirements. Tommy Walsh and Alex Rivera worked on route planning and contingencies. Sarah observed their process without immediately contributing. Her role as advisor meant she should guide rather than direct, allowing the recruits to develop their own solutions while preventing catastrophic errors. "The compound has 4 buildings," Mike announced, studying the surveillance photos. The target individuals were last seen in the central structure, but they could have moved to any of the locations. "What about security measures?" Jason Torres asked. "Minimal electronic security, but They may have early warning systems like motion sensors or guard animals, David replied, checking the intelligence reports. Sarah watched as they worked through the tactical challenges, noting their approach to problem-solving and leadership dynamics. The pressure of real consequences was forcing them to be more thorough and careful than they had been during training exercises. We need to establish containment first, Jake decided. If they scatter when we approach, we could lose them entirely. Agreed, Mike said. But we also need to avoid collateral damage. If they have explosives, a direct assault could trigger a detonation. Sarah cleared her throat. What's your assessment of their likely reaction to contact? The question forced the recruits to think beyond the immediate tactical challenges to the psychological aspects of the operation. If they're planning an attack, they might be prepared to fight, Tommy suggested. Or they might panic and make mistakes, Alex countered. Both possibilities need to be planned for, Sarah noted. What contingencies have you developed? The discussion continued for 3 hours, with the recruits working through various scenarios and options. Sarah provided guidance when they missed critical factors, but allowed them to reach their own conclusions about most tactical decisions. The final plan called for a carefully coordinated approach that would surround the compound while providing multiple opportunities for the targets to surrender peacefully. If resistance was encountered, the plan included escalation procedures designed to minimize both risk and collateral damage. It's a solid plan, Sarah told Captain Morrison during her private briefing. They've considered most of the important factors and developed reasonable contingencies. Any concerns? Morrison asked. They're nervous, which is appropriate. But nervousness can lead to hesitation or overreaction under stress. The leadership dynamics are still developing, and this will be their first test under actual pressure. Morrison nodded. Your recommendation? Proceed with the operation. They're as ready as they can be without real experience, and this scenario provides an ideal opportunity to evaluate their performance under actual conditions. The operation began at sunset with the insertion of teams at predetermined positions around the target compound. Sarah accompanied the command element while the recruits took their assigned positions in the containment network. All teams report ready, Jake announced over the radio from his position as ground commander. Execute, came the response from the operations center. The initial approach proceeded exactly as planned. The recruits moved into position without detection, establishing the containment perimeter and preparing for the next phase of the operation. Movement in Building 2, reported Mike Stevens from his observation position. 2 individuals, appears to be normal activity. Sarah watched through night vision as the recruits managed the complex coordination required to maintain security while gathering intelligence. Their radio discipline was professional, and their positioning showed good tactical awareness. The first complication arose when the targets moved between buildings unexpectedly, forcing the teams to adjust their positions while maintaining containment. They're moving toward the northern exit, Tommy reported urgently. Bravo team, shift coverage to Sector 4, Jake ordered, demonstrating the kind of adaptive leadership that special operations demanded. Sarah noted the smooth execution of the adjustment. The recruits were thinking clearly under pressure and communicating effectively. The actual contact phase began when David Park's team was detected by one of the targets. Instead of panicking, the recruits implemented their contingency plan with professional precision. Contact front, one individual moving toward the main building, David reported calmly. All teams, execute containment protocol, Jake ordered. The suspects were surrounded and called upon to surrender through loudspeakers operated by the support team. Sarah watched as the recruits maintained their positions while experienced operators took the lead in negotiating with the targets. 2 of the 4 suspects surrendered immediately, but the remaining 2 barricaded themselves in the central building and demanded safe passage in exchange for not detonating explosives they claimed to possess. Classic standoff situation, Sarah observed to Captain Morrison. Let's see how they handle it. The recruits adapted their plan to the new circumstances, shifting from an arrest operation to a hostage negotiation scenario. Their flexibility and calm under pressure impressed the observing officers. We need to verify whether they actually have explosives, Mike suggested during the hasty planning session. And we need to prevent them from destroying any intelligence materials, added David. Jason Torres volunteered for the dangerous task of getting close enough to the building to conduct surveillance. I can use the drainage system we identified during planning to get eyes on the interior. It was exactly the kind of initiative that special operations required. Sarah felt a surge of professional pride as she watched the recruits problem solve under genuine pressure. The surveillance mission confirmed that the suspects did not actually possess explosives, though they did have weapons and were prepared to resist. This intelligence allowed the team to develop a plan for ending the standoff without unnecessary risk. Simultaneous entry from 2 points, with distraction from a third, Jake decided. We overwhelm them before they can react effectively. The execution was textbook perfect. Coordinated breaches at precisely timed intervals, followed by rapid room clearing that secured both suspects without injury to anyone involved. Targets secured, building clear, Mike reported as the operation concluded successfully. During the post-mission debrief, the performance evaluations were unanimously positive. The recruits had planned and executed a complex operation under real-world conditions with results that met or exceeded professional standards. Outstanding performance across the board, Captain Morrison announced. Leadership was effective, tactical execution was sound, and adaptability under pressure was exemplary. Ms. Harrison consulted her evaluation forms. Based on the comprehensive assessment over the past week, Training Group 7 is recommended for advancement to Phase 2 Special Operations Training. The announcement was met with a combination of relief, excitement, and disbelief. They had not only survived the evaluation process, but had proven themselves worthy of continuing toward their goal of becoming special operators. There is one additional matter to address, Captain Morrison said, looking directly at Sarah. Petty Officer Chin's assignment to this program was part of a broader evaluation of training methods and integration procedures. He paused to ensure he had everyone's attention. Based on the success of this program, similar evaluation protocols will be implemented in future training cycles. The lessons learned here will influence how special operations candidates are assessed and developed. Sarah stood and faced the group of recruits she had spent a week evaluating. You exceeded expectations in every measurable category. More importantly, you demonstrated the mental flexibility and professional growth that special operations demands. Jake Morrison stepped forward and extended his hand. Thank you for pushing us, for helping us improve, and for being honest with us when it mattered. One by one, the other recruits followed suit, shaking hands with Sarah and expressing their appreciation for what she had contributed to.